Hey guys, welcome to another tutorial video. Today I want to talk about airbrushing. Now I want to add airbrushing to my channel, and before I do that I need you to know about your airbrush. So this is going to be a quick little guide on the airbrush that I use, which is the Grex Genesis XGI2, which the 2 means that it's a 2mm nozzle on the airbrush. So let's open it up and get familiar with what we're going to be using. So I like Grex. I've been using Grex for about 6 years. I've used a few other airbrushes, but I'm the most comfortable with Grex in the way it sprays and the way the equipment is broken down on the airbrush. So before we start taking things apart, just want to familiarize you guys with the different parts and pieces. Have our cap on our cup. It's got a little breather hole in the top. Common problem with feeding is that you slosh the paint around, this breather hole gets clogged, and it could create a vacuum in your paint pot, and it keeps the paint from coming out of the airbrush. So we're going to take that off, set it to the side. After that, we're going to take the handle off now, and it just unscrews. Pretty much the same on every airbrush I've used. I haven't seen an airbrush that doesn't have a handle on it. You have your needle chuck here. Whenever you start taking apart your airbrush, first thing you want to do is take your needle out so you don't stab yourself or bend the tip of the needle, which the tip of my needle is a little bit bent right now, but it's still usable. I'm going to go ahead and take the rest of the chuck off here. Now that just is a finger tight. This is a split screw that is hollow so that the needle can go through it, and that just pressure clamps the needle down so that when you pull back on the trigger, the needle will move back and let paint flow through the nozzle. We'll take the needle guard off now. These are magnetic on the Grex. Some of them will unscrew. Some of them, they got like a little twist lock, but this one's a little nice magnetic. You can actually store the extra ones that you have in the box on a work table that has some metal on it. We have the nozzle cover at the front. And the nozzle cover is what guides the air past the nozzle here. And then the force of the air moving over the nozzle and past the tip, which is actually in line with the front of the nozzle cover, is what causes the paint to flow out of the front. This is where you're going to have 90% of your clogs. If your airbrush isn't working right, you either have a stopped up nozzle cover where the air can't escape, or you have paint stuck in your nozzle. Now, some airbrushes have floating nozzles. This one has a threaded nozzle, so we're going to take that off. And if your airbrush comes with a little tool like this, most of these little tools are for loosening pieces and parts on your airbrush. So that little hex is what gets it loose. We'll take this out, and then let's go ahead and take the cup off. On this one, the cup is detachable. On some, they aren't. I find it useful because I mix the paint in the actual cup with thinner instead of in a secondary container and then pour it in like some people do, which again is fine. It's whatever works for you. But I like to mix in my cup. It makes painting a little bit faster, and it makes having to clean less things more convenient. And you'll notice a little bit of paint residue here and there on some things. I'm kind of bad to my airbrush, but that's okay. Alright, taking off the back. This can be a little bit of a hard twist. The first time you do it, you might need to get pliers to do it the first time. But we have our spring guide. That's what keeps the spring in line and pushes for tension with our needle. Our spring, and then the chuck guide again. Our trigger slides out, and then our needle rock or actuator, or there's many different names for it, but this is what actually moves this bar back in the body of the airbrush to pull the needle backwards in the airbrush. And that's just about everything disassembled. You only have one other part, which is the air valve here, which when you press down on the trigger, a little pin will push down here and it lets air out the sides, and you can see that there's a little cut here which will push air through this area, and it actually comes up through this little flange here and up into the nozzle area of the airbrush. I'm not going to take this part out, but hopefully you can see there's a little pin down in here, and this pin, if you use airbrush a lot like I do, you can get paint around it, it can get dried out from putting cleaner in there and scrubbing stuff out. So every few months I like to take a little bit of air tool oil, and it came out anyway, a little bit of air tool oil, and put it down in here when I'm reassembling after cleaning, and then that helps keep the trigger lubricated, because sometimes you'll notice that the trigger will stop up, and that can get kind of annoying when you're painting. So I'm going to try and drop this pin back in here. I didn't want to take it out because it's kind of difficult to get back in. I use the back of the airbrush here. Again, I don't do edits, so you get to watch me fumble and mess up with stuff too. So now the pin's seated in there. I usually just kind of line it up and drop it, and you know, third try, got it in. All right, reassembling the airbrush. We take our actuator, and there's a little bar in the back of the airbrush here. You can kind of see it there. And I'm going to put my actuator, and I'm going to rest it against that and pull it backwards. The trigger. You'll notice the trigger has a shape to it. Some of them have a little bit of a flange on the back like this one's. Other ones will have a shape that actually lets it kind of meet up with the body when you pull it back. But you want to make sure that, you know, for comfort's sake, you get it forward. When that's resting in there and you have your valve retightened down, your trigger will bounce, and you'll know that you'll have it in the right spot. We'll go ahead and put our nozzle back on. Now when you're putting your nozzle back on, you want to be careful, because the threads can break if you tighten too much. So you just want to do a finger tighten on it. Don't crank down on it, because you don't want to strip your threads out in there. All right, now put our spring back on our chuck guide and slip the spring guide over the top of that. This can be a little bit tricky, especially on the Grexes. When you put this on for the first time, you have to line this up, and this little hex actually lines up. So if you grab the back and spin it till it seats itself so you can pull it out, then you can tighten it down. If it's not lined up, you'll sit there and spin, and the threads will look like they're trying to catch, but they won't. All right, we'll put our nozzle cap back on. And then pre-seat our needle chuck. Or slide the needle back through. When you're doing this, you want to be real careful. If you feel any sort of pressure, stop immediately, because all you're going to do is curl your needle up. And just push it in. You can see it come out the end here. Tighten our chuck. Remember to rock your needle back before you put your guard on, so you don't actually stab yourself or bend your needle. Put the cup back on. Handle on. Now the handle on the back has this little screw in. It's a stop for the needle. So sometimes when you get an airbrush, this will be all the way forward, and you'll go to pull your trigger back and nothing will happen. And I've had a few people say, hey, my airbrush isn't working, I can't pull my trigger back. And it's like, it's just because this little thing that you probably didn't even know turns, and it changes how far you can pull your trigger back out. So if you want to adjust where your paint stops, because you can, you know, barely pull back on this trigger and paint will come out. So if you push that forward, it gives you a little bit of adjustability, a little bit of a safety on the backside, so you don't accidentally pull too hard and spray all over the place. We'll put our cap back on. And then I have this extra little thing that I want to show you. This doesn't usually come with the airbrushes. It comes with some of the kits, but it's called a GMAC valve. And what it is, it's a little quick connect that goes on the bottom of your airbrush, so it just clicks like this, so it makes hooking your airbrush up to your hose and your compressor a little bit quicker. But it's also an inline valve, so I like to have about 80 psi, and I know that's pretty high, but 80 psi back pressure, and then I can adjust my pressure right at the airbrush. So if I want to clean out, all I have to do is spin this up, blow out my paint, blow out my cleaner, and then I can turn it back down, put some more paint in there, and keep painting without having to adjust the compressor all the time, because that can get really annoying. But that is it, and I hope this was an informative video for you guys, and I will see you next time.